The crystalline spires of Thessia Prime caught the light of 3 suns, refracting it into cascades of impossible color that danced across the plaza where representatives from across the galaxy had gathered. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the assembled members of the Galactic Medical Consortium, her hands trembling slightly as she held the data tablet containing humanity's application for membership. She had practiced this presentation for months, rehearsed every word, anticipated every question. What she had not prepared for was the casual contempt in their eyes. High Physician Zephros of the Ivari floated before the council chamber, his form a shimmering construct of pure energy contained within a vaguely humanoid outline. The Ivari had transcended physical illness millennia ago, their bodies existing as carefully controlled energy matrices that could reconfigure at will. Disease, to them, was a myth from their primitive past, a ghost story told to children about the dark times before enlightenment. Sarah activated the holographic display, showing humanity's research in brilliant three-dimensional detail. Adaptive immune response algorithms, universal antibody synthesis, mRNA manipulation techniques that could theoretically teach any organism to fight any pathogen. The work represented decades of research from Earth's brightest minds, built on the foundation of millions of years of evolutionary warfare between humanity and the microscopic armies that had always sought to destroy them. Zephros barely glanced at the display. His voice, when he spoke, resonated directly in the minds of all present, carrying with it the weight of ancient authority and barely concealed disdain. Dr. Chen, your species' approach to medicine is, frankly, barbaric. Your immune systems function through a constant state of warfare, attacking foreign bodies with aggressive cellular responses. You intentionally introduce weakened pathogens into your bodies and call it prevention. You poison yourselves with chemicals to kill infections, accepting massive collateral damage to your own cells. This is not medicine. This is biological violence. Sarah felt the heat rising in her cheeks but kept her voice steady. She had expected resistance, but not this immediate dismissal. High Physician, with respect, our approach may seem aggressive, but it's proven effective across countless. Effective? The interruption came from General Krath, the Skrath delegate, his reptilian features twisting into what might have been a smile on his species. The Skrath were cold-blooded, militaristic, their scaled bodies virtually immune to temperature extremes and most toxins. Your species suffers from hundreds of diseases we eliminated from our genome 3,000 years ago. You are walking petri dishes, barely contained plagues threatening to contaminate every world you visit. The other council members shifted in their seats. The Vorquin representative, her silicon-based body glinting like animated crystal, nodded slowly. The Vorquin had never experienced disease in their entire evolutionary history. Their inorganic biology simply did not support microbial life. To them, the very concept of infection was alien and vaguely horrifying. Sarah's hands clenched around the tablet. She thought of the centuries of suffering that had brought humanity to this point. The Black Death that had killed half of Europe, the Spanish flu that had claimed 50 million lives in a single year, the desperate race to develop vaccines, antibiotics, antivirals. The countless researchers who had dedicated their lives to fighting an enemy that evolved faster than any army, that killed without malice or mercy, that could never be permanently defeated, only temporarily held at bay. We don't have experience with disease because we're lucky, Sarah said, her voice harder now. We have experience because we've survived everything our planet could throw at us. 4 billion years of evolution in one of the most biologically hostile environments in the known galaxy. When something goes wrong, when a new pathogen emerges or an old one mutates, you'll need species like us who understand how to fight back. Zephros' energy form flickered, the Ivari equivalent of a dismissive wave. Nothing will go wrong, Dr. Chen. We are beyond such primitive concerns. Our genetic lines are perfected, our environments controlled. The age of disease ended for civilized species long before your ancestors climbed down from their trees. The rejection was formal, final, and humiliating. Earth's application to the Galactic Medical Consortium was denied. Dr. Sarah Chen and her delegation were escorted from Thessia Prime within the hour, their revolutionary research dismissed as the desperate scrabbling of a species too crude to join the enlightened ranks of galactic civilization. On the transport back to Earth, Sarah stared out at the stars and wondered if pride would always trump wisdom, even among species that had conquered space itself. She would have her answer sooner than she imagined. 300 light-years away, on the fortress world of Skrath Prime, Supreme General Krath stood before a sealed laboratory and felt something close to joy. The Skrath Empire had long chafed under the restrictions imposed by the Galactic Council. Their military might was constrained by peace treaties. Their territorial ambitions were limited by diplomatic agreements. Their natural superiority was denied by species who cowered behind laws and councils rather than accepting the supremacy of strength. But Krath had found a way to change everything. Behind the laboratory's triple-sealed doors, Skrath's finest biological engineers had spent 5 years developing what they called Helix 7. It was a masterpiece of genetic engineering, a synthetic pathogen designed with a single elegant purpose: to target the specific genetic markers of the 6 dominant species in the Galactic Council: the Ivari, the Vorquin, the graceful Lyrisians, the aquatic Nether, the insectoid Krell, and the gaseous Ithral. 6 species who held the galaxy's power. 6 species whose genetic perfection had become their fatal weakness. Helix 7 was invisible to standard medical scans. It had a long incubation period, allowing it to spread through normal contact before symptoms appeared. It was designed to mutate in controlled ways, adapting to each species-specific biology while remaining within predictable parameters. And most importantly, only the Skrath possessed the cure. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Release Helix 7 subtly through trade routes and diplomatic channels. Wait for it to spread. Watch as the galaxy's leadership succumb to a mysterious illness. Then, at the moment of maximum desperation, offer the cure in exchange for political concessions. Nothing too obvious, just a slow, steady accumulation of power and territory. Just the natural order reasserting itself, with the strong rising to dominate the weak. Krath authorized the release with a single gesture. Within days, diplomatic pouches carrying Helix 7 in microscopic quantities were dispatched to a dozen worlds. The pathogen was stable, controlled, perfect. Or so they thought. The first cases appeared 6 months after Sarah's humiliation on Thessia Prime. On 3 different worlds, separated by hundreds of light years, members of the Ivari began experiencing strange fluctuations in their energy matrices. Their carefully controlled forms flickered and destabilized. Some collapsed into unconscious heaps of dying light. Others simply winked out of existence, their energy dispersing into the void. On the Vorquin homeworld, crystalline citizens began developing fractures in their silicon structures. The cracks spread like spiderwebs through their bodies, and when they moved, they could hear themselves breaking from the inside. Within a week, the mysterious illness had spread to a dozen worlds. Within 2 weeks, to 100. The Galactic Medical Consortium, so confident in their superiority just months before, found themselves facing something they had no framework to understand. Disease had returned to the galaxy, and they had forgotten how to fight it. High Physician Zephros stood in the Council's emergency medical facility on Thessia Prime, watching patients die with an increasing sense of horror. The Ivari's energy-based medicine, so effective at treating injuries and genetic abnormalities, was useless against Helix 7. They could see the pathogen in its victims, watch it replicate and spread, but they had no way to stop it. It was like watching a city burn and having no concept of water. The consortium's greatest minds worked around the clock, but every solution they attempted failed. Genetic restructuring accelerated the disease. Energy-based treatments had no effect. Isolation protocols were implemented too late. The pathogen had already spread to every major population center in the galaxy. The death toll climbed from thousands to millions. Entire planets went dark as their populations collapsed. The Lyrisians, whose elegant forms and psychic abilities had made them natural diplomats, began dying in massive numbers. Their queen, a being of such grace that artists traveled light years just to glimpse her, withered in her palace as her attendants fell around her. In the Nether's oceanic cities, the waters turned toxic with decomposing bodies. The Krell's hive worlds fell silent as their queens succumbed, and their workers mindlessly continued their tasks until they too collapsed. The Ithral, existing as clouds of sentient gas, found their molecular bonds breaking apart, their consciousness dissolving into incoherent static. And then Helix 7 did something its creators had not anticipated. It mutated. The pathogen had been designed with controlled mutation protocols, carefully programmed to adapt to specific species while remaining stable. But the Skrath scientists had not accounted for the sheer diversity of galactic biology. Exposed to dozens of different genetic systems simultaneously, bombarded by various medical treatments, Helix 7's synthetic structure began to evolve beyond its programming. On Skrathis Prime, Supreme General Krath received the first reports of Skrath citizens falling ill with a mixture of disbelief and growing horror. This was not part of the plan. Helix 7 was supposed to leave the Skrath untouched. But the pathogen had found vulnerabilities in Skrath biology that even its creators had not known existed. Krath summoned his lead scientist, demanding answers, demanding the cure. But Dr. Sheth, the brilliant but amoral mind behind Helix 7, was already dead, killed by his own creation in the laboratory where he had thought himself safe. The cure's formula had been stored exclusively in encrypted files keyed to Sheth's genetic signature, files that died with him. Within 2 weeks of the first Skrath infections, General Krath himself lay dying in his fortress, his scaled hide cracking and bleeding, his internal organs liquefying. His last thoughts were of power and ambition, of a plan that had spiraled beyond all control. He died alone, abandoned by subordinates fleeing the plague, his dreams of empire dissolving like his body. The controlled weapon had become a galaxy-wide extinction event. On Earth, Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the Centers for Disease Control headquarters in Geneva, watching the crisis unfold through real-time feeds from across the galaxy. The screen showed scenes of devastation that would have been unimaginable just months before. Great cities empty, medical facilities overflowing, mass graves being dug on worlds that had not seen death on such a scale in millennia, and humanity remained completely untouched. Helix 7 had been designed to target the genetic markers of the 6 dominant council species. The Skrath, in their arrogance, had not bothered to include humanity in their calculations. Humans were irrelevant, primitives whose medicine had been rejected by the enlightened galaxy. Why waste effort on a species that didn't matter? But even as Helix 7 mutated beyond its original programming, even as it found new vulnerabilities in species after species, it could not gain purchase in human biology. The few humans who encountered the pathogen found their immune systems responding with overwhelming force. Antibodies adapted and neutralized the threat within hours. Humans who should have been patient zero in devastating outbreaks instead experienced mild cold-like symptoms before their bodies eradicated every trace of the infection. 4 billion years of evolutionary warfare had prepared humanity for this moment. Every plague that had swept across Earth, every pandemic that had killed millions, every virus and bacteria and fungus that had evolved to kill humans had also driven human immune systems to become the most aggressive, adaptive, and relentless in the known galaxy. The question now facing Earth's government was simple but profound. Should they help? The debate raged for days. In the halls of the United Earth Assembly, representatives from every nation argued passionately on both sides. Some demanded isolation. Let the galaxy that had rejected them suffer the consequences of their arrogance. Let them learn humility. Let humanity survive in peace while the rest of the galaxy burned. But Sarah Chen stood before the assembly and spoke with quiet conviction. They were wrong about us, she said. They dismissed our suffering, mocked our methods, rejected our help. They called us primitives and contaminants, and they were wrong. But if we let them die now, if we choose revenge over compassion, then we prove them right about the only thing that truly matters. We prove that we are as cruel and small as they believed. We proved that we learned nothing from our own suffering except how to inflict it on others." She paused, looking out at the assembled representatives, seeing the anger and hurt in their faces, feeling it in her own heart. "I was humiliated on Thessia Prime. I stood before the consortium and offered them our knowledge, our experience, our help, and they laughed at me. They laughed at all of us. I wanted them to acknowledge us, to see that our suffering had value, that it made us strong and wise and worthy. And now I have a choice. I can let them die and call it justice, or I can help them and prove that I was right all along, that we are better than they imagined. That compassion is not weakness. That the species that suffered the most can be the one that saves everyone else." The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Earth's message to the Galactic Council was delivered by Admiral James Rodriguez, a career military officer whose calm professionalism masked a core of absolute steel. He stood before the Council's holographic transmission, looking at the desperate, dying faces of beings who had once dismissed humanity as beneath their notice. "The people of Earth have authorized me to offer assistance with the current medical crisis," Rodriguez said, his voice even and emotionless. "However, this assistance comes with conditions, non-negotiable conditions." High Physician Zephros, his energy form flickering weakly, tried to muster his old authority. "You cannot dictate terms when," a coughing fit interrupted him, or whatever the Ivari equivalent was. His form destabilized, fragmenting into static before reassembling. "I can and I will," Rodriguez continued. "First condition, humanity will have full access to all medical records and genetic databases from every council species. Second, Earth will receive permanent seats on all health-related organizations and decision-making bodies. Third, human medical personnel will operate with complete sovereign immunity. Fourth, the Galactic Council will issue a formal, public acknowledgement that human medical expertise is essential and valuable. These terms are not up for debate. Accept them and we save your species. Reject them and we return to Earth and seal our borders. You have 1 hour to decide." The transmission ended. Zephros wanted to refuse. Even dying, even watching his species face extinction, part of him recoiled at accepting help from the primitives he had dismissed. Pride was a hard thing to kill, harder than any disease. But the Vorquin delegate, her crystalline body so fractured she could barely move, spoke with the hollowness of absolute defeat. "Accept, please. Whatever they want, just make it stop." One by one, the other delegates agreed. They had no choice. Pride was a luxury that the dying could not afford. Within 12 hours, Earth's response fleet launched from orbital stations around humanity's homeworld. The ships were not warships but hospital vessels, massive structures retrofitted to carry medical equipment, supplies, and most importantly, personnel. Thousands of doctors, nurses, epidemiologists, virologists, and support staff volunteered for the mission. They knew they faced a situation unprecedented in galactic history. They knew many of them might not return. They went anyway. Dr. Sarah Chen commanded the flagship Asclepius, named for the Greek god of medicine. As the fleet made its first jump into hyperspace, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the humiliation on Thessia Prime to leading the largest medical operation in human history, from rejection to redemption. She tried not to think of it as vindication. That felt too much like gloating, too much like revenge. This was not about being right. This was about being needed. The fleet arrived at Thessia Prime first, the symbolic heart of galactic medicine, now transformed into a charnel house of dying light. Sarah walked through streets once filled with dancing colors, now dim and flickering. Ivari citizens collapsed in the plaza where she had once presented humanity's research. She felt no satisfaction in their suffering, only a deep sadness at how much death could have been prevented if pride had not stood in the way of wisdom. The human medical teams deployed with military efficiency. They set up field hospitals, established quarantine protocols, began the massive task of triage, and they started the treatment that would seem brutal and invasive to species who had long forgotten what desperate medicine looked like. The key to combating Helix 7 lay in humanity's greatest biological advantage: adaptability. Human antibodies exposed to the pathogen, learned to fight it with terrifying speed. Blood plasma from exposed humans, rich with these adaptive antibodies, could be transfused into alien biology. The antibodies would not provide permanent immunity, but they would teach alien immune systems how to recognize and fight the invader. It was painful. It was crude. It was exactly what the galaxy needed. The Ivari, used to gentle energy-based healing, recoiled from needles and IV drips. The Vorquin found the transfusion process agonizing as foreign biological material was introduced into their silicon structures. The Lyrisians wept at the indignity of it, their graceful bodies violated by what they saw as barbaric procedures. But it worked. Patient by patient, world by world, the death rate began to decline. Sarah and her team worked 18-hour days, moving from crisis to crisis, training local medical personnel in human techniques, adapting treatments to each species' unique biology. It was exhausting, heartbreaking work. For every patient they saved, 10 more died before treatment could reach them. But slowly, steadily, humanity turned the tide. The Lyrisians resisted longest. Their queen, isolated in her palace, refused to allow human doctors near her. She would not permit her elegant form to be subjected to such crude methodology. She issued proclamations about maintaining dignity in the face of death, about refusing contamination from lesser species. Her population died at catastrophic rates, 60% gone in 2 weeks. The Lyrisian civilization, known for its art and philosophy, teetered on the brink of extinction. Finally, with her attendants dead and her own body failing, the queen sent a message to Sarah Chen. A simple request. Please. Sarah arrived at the palace to find the queen alone, her luminescent skin dim and cracked, her psychic voice barely a whisper. The most beautiful being Sarah had ever seen, reduced to this. I was wrong, the queen said, her mental voice carrying shame and desperation. I chose pride over life. I let my people die rather than accept help from those I considered beneath me. I am a fool. Please save what remains of my species. I do not deserve it, but they do. Sarah prepared the transfusion personally, her hands gentle as she inserted the IV line into the queen's arm. On Earth, we learned a long time ago that survival matters more than pride, she said softly, and that accepting help is not weakness, it's wisdom. The queen survived, so did enough of her people to rebuild their civilization, though the scars would never fully heal. 3 months into the operation, the death rate dropped below 10,000 per day. 6 months in, new cases of Helix 7 approached 0. The vaccine that Sarah's team had developed, using human immune response patterns as a template, proved effective across all species. The pathogen that had threatened to end galactic civilization was beaten, but the cost had been staggering. 2.4 trillion dead, 30% of the galaxy's population, entire species reduced to scattered remnants, worlds that would take generations to recover. The age of genetic perfection had ended in a plague of their own creation, stopped only by the species they had dismissed as too primitive to teach them anything. The truth about Helix 7's origins emerged from data recovered on Skrath Prime. The galaxy learned that the plague had been artificial, an act of war that had backfired catastrophically. The Skrath Empire, already devastated by the plague, collapsed entirely. Their remaining colonies were absorbed by neighboring species, their military might dissolved, their name became synonymous with hubris and folly. But the revelation raised darker questions. If one species could engineer such a weapon, others could too. The galaxy's genetic perfection, once thought to be their greatest strength, was now recognized as a fatal vulnerability. Monocultures were efficient but fragile. Diversity, with all its messiness and complications, was the key to survival. Earth did not gloat. Humanity did not seek revenge or demand reparations beyond what had been agreed. Instead, they built medical facilities on 1,000 worlds, all using human-designed protocols. A pandemic response corps, staffed by doctors from every species but led by human epidemiologists who understood how to fight biological threats. Mandatory disease preparedness training for all council species. A complete overhaul of galactic medicine from the ground up. Dr. Sarah Chen was appointed Chief Medical Director of the Galactic Union. She accepted the position with quiet grace, making it clear that her goal was not human dominance but collaborative survival. She recruited the best minds from every species, teaching them human techniques while learning from their unique perspectives. The new Galactic Medical Consortium became a genuine partnership, built on respect rather than hierarchy. High Physician Zephros requested a private meeting with Sarah 1 year after the plague's end. He was dying. Helix 7 had damaged his energy matrix in ways that could not be repaired. He had perhaps a month left, maybe less. They met in a garden on Thessia Prime, a quiet place where the colors still danced but now seemed somehow more precious, more fragile. Zephros floated before Sarah, his form dimmer than before, flickering like a candle in the wind. "I was wrong," he said simply. "I mistook perfection for strength and isolation for safety. I looked at your species and saw only violence and chaos. I did not see the wisdom earned through suffering. I did not understand that your immune systems were not barbaric but brilliant, that your experience with disease was not a mark of inferiority but a gift that could save us all." Sarah listened quietly. She had imagined this moment many times, had rehearsed the words she would say, the accusations she could make. But now, facing this dying being who had humiliated her, she felt only sadness. "Your species has suffered more than we can imagine," Zephros continued. "Billions of your ancestors died to diseases we eliminated before we reached the stars. That suffering made you strong in ways we could never understand because we never had to face it. I dismissed your pain as primitive. I realize now it was the price of the wisdom that saved us." "Suffering doesn't make you strong," Sarah said softly. "The choice to keep going does. The choice to learn from pain rather than be destroyed by it. The choice to help others even when they've hurt you. That's what makes us strong." Zephros' form flickered. "Will you forgive us? Will you forgive me?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. She thought of that day on Thessia Prime, standing before the consortium with humanity's research, only to be mocked and dismissed. She thought of the months of work, the patients who had died despite her best efforts, the weight of billions of lives resting on decisions she made in the desperate hours of the plague. "We already have," she said finally. "That's what we do. We heal. We forgive. We move forward, because holding on to anger and hurt only makes us sick in different ways." Zephros died 2 weeks later. At his request, his final energy dispersal was held in the presence of human doctors, the species he had once scorned, the species that had tried to save him even when they knew they could not. A monument was erected on Thessia Prime, in the very plaza where Sarah had been rejected. It was made of earth stone, granite quarried from the mountains of Tibet, solid and enduring. The inscription was written in every galactic language, a testament meant to last for millennia. "In memory of the 2.4 trillion souls lost to the Helix plague, let this remind us that strength is not the absence of weakness, that survival is not the absence of struggle, and that wisdom is learned from those who have endured both. With eternal gratitude to humanity, who taught us that compassion is the greatest medicine, and that those who suffer most can still choose to heal." At the base of the monument, a smaller plaque bore a quote from Dr. Sarah Chen: "We are all fragile. We are all mortal. We all need help. There is no shame in any of this. There is only the choice of whether to offer help or withhold it, to build together or die alone." The galaxy changed in the years that followed. The understanding of what deathworld truly meant spread through every level of society. Earth was not just a dangerous planet that produced dangerous species. It was a crucible that forged resilient life through constant challenge. Every organism on Earth, from the smallest bacterium to humanity itself, was a survivor of 4 billion years of biological warfare. Humans had not evolved beyond disease. They had evolved to fight it eternally, to adapt and survive and keep fighting no matter how many times they were knocked down. This made them not contaminated or primitive, but invaluable. The galaxy needed species that understood struggle, that knew how to face extinction and choose to fight anyway. The Galactic Medical Consortium thrived under the new paradigm. Half its researchers were human. The other half were aliens trained in human techniques but bringing their own unique insights. Ivari energy medicine combined with human immunology. Vorquin structural analysis enhancing human surgical techniques, Lyrisian psychic healing integrated with human psychiatric care. The synthesis created something greater than either approach alone. 20 years after the plague, a new generation of doctors worked side by side, barely remembering a time when such cooperation would have been unthinkable. They had eradicated 12 major diseases and prepared protocols for countless more. When students asked about the Helix plague, their instructors, human and alien alike, said the same thing: never again. Because the galaxy had learned its lesson. The strongest immune system was not the one that never faced disease. It was the one that had learned to fight back. The strongest species was not the one that had eliminated all weakness. It was the one that had learned to survive despite weakness, to adapt to challenges, to help others through the darkness. Dr. Sarah Chen, now in her 70s, still taught at the medical academy on Thessia Prime. Her hair had gone gray, her movements were slower, but her mind remained sharp and her passion for teaching undiminished. She stood before a lecture hall filled with students from a dozen species, all listening intently as she explained the fundamental principles of human medicine. On the screen behind her, displayed in letters large enough for the back row to see, was the phrase that had become the foundation of the new galactic medical philosophy. The first rule of human medicine: every body wants to survive. Sometimes it just needs help remembering how. The students, human and Ivari and Vorquin and Lyrisian and more, took notes together. They asked questions without fear of being mocked. They challenged ideas without being dismissed. They learned from each other, building on each other's knowledge, creating something new from the synthesis of many perspectives. The galaxy had found a new equilibrium, built not on the perfection of any single species, but on the strength of many species working together. Humanity had found its place not as conquerors or rulers, but as healers and teachers. The species that had suffered the most, that had endured plague after plague throughout its history, had become the galaxy's greatest hope against the darkness that still lurked in the universe. And in quiet moments when Sarah looked out at the stars from her office window, she thought back to that day of rejection, the humiliation and anger and hurt. She felt none of it now. Only gratitude that she had been there when needed, that humanity had been ready when the call came, that compassion had triumphed over pride. They had laughed when humans offered medical aid, but when the plague came, humanity had been there. And that was all that mattered. The galaxy would not forget again.